Hey, do you ask yourself the question if you should shoot in 4K or in 1080p? If yes, then this video is for you because I will answer this question. And I shot all of my videos over the past 2 years in 4K, so I got a lot of experience with it. And there's actually a lot of stuff that I like about it, but also there are some downsides, of course, so I will talk about that. So let's start first with why I actually shoot in 4K. And I must actually say that the biggest reason for me is just personal preference. I personally prefer a very sharp and detailed look in my videos. I shoot mostly travel content, and in that case I just like to see every detail. Sometimes it's probably a bit too detailed, like does she wear makeup or not. It's really that in 4K you can see every little detail in your face when you shoot talking headshots, so it's sometimes a little bit of a bummer when there's something wrong, but overall I just prefer the detailed looks. So especially when you shoot travel content, I just want to see more details in the landscapes and so on, and that makes a huge difference for me. And the next reason, and that's also a very big one for me, is that I'm more flexible in post when I shoot in 4K. For example, I can crop in the footage and then I can animate stuff, like I could animate some camera movement, which is great. But also right now what you see here is that I simply cropped a bit closer to my face, and that gives the impression that I would have two cameras, even if it's shot with one camera only. So that's great that I can do that, but apart from that, it's also good to have more pixels in your footage for camera stabilization, like post stabilization, because when you want to stabilize your footage in post because it's a bit shaky or so on, then it's actually easier for the computer to calculate the movement of your camera when you have more pixels, so the stabilization gets a little bit better. So that's great as well. And what a lot of people do is they shoot in 4K and then they publish in 1080p because they think they need more pixels than they actually have in their published video to be able to crop in without losing quality, what is theoretically correct, but practically, even when you publish in a 4K and you have some clips where you cropped in or you stabilize them, then most people won't really notice the difference because you don't lose enough sharpness so that people will see that in the final result. So it's actually totally fine if you shoot in 4K and you publish in 4K, even if you crop into your shots and you stabilize them and so on. You don't necessarily need to publish in 1080p. And another reason that's probably not the biggest reason for a lot of people is that you want to have future-proof footage. Just imagine if you show the videos that you shoot today in a few years to your kids, maybe in 20 years or so, then it looks for them like your grandma would show you some black and white footage, like, ugh, no one wants to see that. That's probably not the biggest issue here. What I mostly mean with it is that you never know really what you want to do with the footage in the future. Let's say in a few months or maybe in 1 or 2 years, you decide that you want to put your travel videos on stock video sites to monetize them. And then maybe because 4K got bigger and bigger, some stock footage sites don't accept 1080p footage. Right now they accept both, but maybe that changed in the future. And also, your videos overall have better quality. We'll come later to that, but for example, the bitrate of a 4K video is usually higher than from a 1080p video. So let's say a TV station or a movie production company hits you up, they want to have some footage from you and they also want to pay you money for that, then at least they want to have a good quality. And if the bitrate is just not there, then that could be an issue already. I actually had it about 2 years ago when I just started shooting 4K, that a TV station, or not directly the station, but a company that produced for the station, hit me up and they wanted to have some of my Iceland clips for a documentary in the second biggest German TV station. So that's great. And I was happy at this time that it was 4K footage. I personally didn't really like the footage. It was shot with the first Mavic Pro, and it had this problem that when you didn't have the sharpness at +1, I think, that you get mushy trees and so on. That actually happened in the footage, so I was really surprised that they still took it. But it might be that you're not that lucky, so if the quality doesn't match, then they won't take it. And that could, for example, be if the footage is not in 4K, or at least you don't have a higher bitrate, what is the case when you shoot in 4K. So now I already talked a little bit about bitrate, and I want to get a bit more in-depth about it, because the quality of your video is not just defined by the amount of pixels. It's mostly defined by the bitrate. The higher the bitrate is, and also the higher the bit depth is. Like bit depth means, for example, 8-bit, 10-bit, and so on. And the bit rate is, for example, on standard 4K videos, it's usually, when you record it, somewhere about 100 mbits. It's not megabyte, it's megabits. And for example, 1080p videos usually in your cameras have somewhere around 25 mbits. So you can see this is a huge difference. You just have a lot more details that you can work with when you shoot 4K, just because of the bitrate, not necessarily because of the pixels. And that's a big difference when you do color grading, for example. And as I do a lot of color grading, bitrate actually matters a lot for me. I actually got the Atomos Ninja V recorder for my Panasonic GH5 because that records in 10-bit and I can record in ProRes format. So that means that I can get bit rates of, I think, 800, 900 mbits. And I can really feel that when I color grade, because the footage just doesn't break apart. I don't get any like color artifacts or anything like that there. So bitrate is definitely important, and even the 100 mbits that you get with usual 4K footage are way too low for me. I personally prefer to have a bit more. And that's also important when it comes to YouTube. Like the standard 1080p YouTube video, I think, has a bitrate of about 8 mbits, which is really not high. And YouTube 4K videos already have, I think somewhere about 40 mbits. So that's a huge difference already if you publish your video in 4K or 1080p. But even if you want to publish your videos in 1080p on YouTube, you should make sure that your bitrate is higher. So I would always upload 1080p videos to YouTube that have at least somewhere around 25 mbits, because then YouTube like compresses this footage and it has more details for the compression algorithm to feed it. And when you upload a video with a lower bitrate, then it compresses it also, but it has less details to work with. So the overall video quality that you see on YouTube will be much lower. So it's actually on YouTube, it's not really about uploading in 4K. Like some people say that you should simply upload your videos in 4K even if you shot them in 1080p, like upscale it. And that's not really true in my opinion. It's more about the bitrate than about 4K or 1080p. If you shot in 1080p, then please also publish in 1080p, but just make sure that your bitrate is higher, and then you will also get a good quality on YouTube. So much for the advantages of shooting in 4K. Let's now come to the downsides. And the biggest downside that I actually experienced over the past few years is that it gets pretty expensive when you shoot in 4K, and this for several reasons. Like you just need more gear at first. Like you need a camera that shoots decent 4K, and especially because you're a bit limited with the frame rates, which is also another downside. You need to invest some money in better cameras, like for example a 1080p camera that shoots in up to maybe 60 or 120 frames per second. You can easily get some for maybe 500 to 700 bucks. But if you want to have a camera that shoots 4K 60, like the GH5 does, then you're easily at maybe $1,300, maybe more. So that's already a huge difference. Of course, GoPros and so on can shoot 4K 60 as well, which is great, but they have a much smaller sensor, so it's not the same. You don't get the same quality. Oh, they just opened the road here for cars. And yeah, I mean, other gear that I invested in a lot because of 4K was hard drives, for example. It's just the files are a lot bigger, so you need more storage. Also invested in SSD so that I can edit my footage directly from an SSD and I don't need to fill up my internal hard drive all the time and so on. Then you also need good lenses, because 4K means that you need more sharpness, and if your lens is not sharp enough, then you just won't notice the difference. There's the next car coming. Fortunately, there are not too many cars. Shoo! And probably the most expensive gear that I invested in recently just because of 4K was the MacBook Pro 16-inch, and yeah, that set me back around 3,300 euro. But well, I mean, it's also a good reason at the end to justify purchases like that are actually very expensive. So if you have a bit too much money and you want to spend it on camera gear, then 4K is a good reason to do that. And another issue that a lot of smaller cameras have with 4K is overheating. I actually had this problem with the Canon M6 Mark II last weekend when I shot an online course for a client. There, like, we actually shot about 8 hours, actually a bit more. And after 35 or 40 minutes, the camera overheated, so I had to go back to 1080p. It wasn't a big deal in that case because no one watches 4K for like 8 hours. It was really not that important there, so I switched back to 1080p. But of course I'm a bit more limited now with cropping and camera animation and so on. It's a little bit of a downside, but yeah, it's not a deal breaker at the end. Also, the Sony a6000 series also has this problem a lot. I had that on recent shoots with these cameras as well. And that's also a reason why especially when you have bigger sensors, it actually limits the cameras a little bit. Like, you can even see that there are not many full frame or APS-C cameras out there that support 4K 60, and the reason for that is simply that 4K 60 overheats the sensor pretty fast, so they need to cool it down, and it's very complicated. That's actually why cameras that have 4K 60 and are full frame are pretty big, like the Panasonic S1H, for example, or the upcoming Canon 1DX Mark III. Now, these are very big cameras. The reason for that is simply that they need more space to cool the sensor. So 4K is actually very limiting when it comes to bigger sensors. So at the bottom line, I would say that if you have the option to shoot 4K, you should definitely consider it, simply because it has a lot of really good advantages even if you publish your videos later in 1080p. It gets more expensive when you want to publish your videos in 4K, because then you need a camera that shoots in higher frame rates, and this is usually the case where it gets more expensive. But apart from that, I must actually say there are a lot of great videos out with a lot of views, videos that I also enjoy, that just look great, that are shot and published in 1080p. So this is totally fine. And I would say, especially when you're a beginner right now and you don't have a high budget, you don't make money with your videos and so on, then you should really not think too much about 4K, because 4K just limits you at the end. And in that case, I would just go for a decent 1080p cameras. You can get very good cameras for less than $1,000, and that helps you a lot to start out and just focus on the videos instead of worrying too much about the resolution that you have at the end. So yeah, if you're a beginner and you're limited by your budget, just forget about 4K right now, focus on 1080p, and it will all be fine. You can produce really good videos in 1080p. So I personally will keep shooting in 4K. I just like it more, and video is my biggest passion. I do it all the time. I spend so much money with my videos. Then I think it's also okay to invest some money. Therefore, I don't spend much money on other things, like I never party and I don't drink much alcohol, maybe 2 or 3 times per year, drink something and so on. So that saves a lot of money, and that's at the end the money that goes into my camera gear. I would also say that's actually a good thing about videography. Like, it can actually hold you back from doing bad stuff like drinking alcohol and partying all the time, and puts your life in a better way where you go out, like I did today, at the sunrise, shoot some time lapses or get some other footage, maybe do clients work and so on. So yeah, I mean, better invest your money in camera equipment than in stupid stuff. So what do you think? Do you want to shoot in 4K, or do you already do it, or do you stick with 1080p? Just leave it in the comments below, please. And if you like this video, then please leave me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more tutorials like that in the future, then hit the subscribe and the bell notifications button. And I hope to see you in the next video.